time to talk music, audio gear, and anything else that crosses our minds. I'm Mark.
And I'm Peter.
And welcome to the Hurton Audio Podcast. So, we've been listening to some more new music lately, and there's some great albums coming out recently. On our hit list at the moment, we've got a brand new album called by Bleachers, which is self-titled. Even though it's not
Bleachers,
yeah,
by Bleachers.
Yeah, which is, I always find it interesting when artists do a self-titled album after their debut, and the Main's recently done that as well.
Yeah, I think because of a lot of, I mean, there's a lot of factors on why you do it. You do it because you're like, no, we've finally arrived. That's why a lot of people do it. I feel like that's what Bleachers' sort of thing is. Like they really do feel like they've crossed, I suppose, a barrier, you know. And I think that's why they often say it's self-titled, or it's some sort of reinvention. Like you think about Motley Crue's their self-titled album. That's
yes.
when they get John Corabi in. And, you know, if it ever happens, Coldplay's self-titled album will be their last one, which they love to gaslight their fans about, don't they, really?
Yeah, so, yeah, I suppose it depends on, like, the symbolism of the self-titled album. A lot of people look at a self-titled album as, like, a start. But some people, like say, look at it as a reinvention, an end, like Coldplay famously, in any of Chris Martin's interviews has hinted that the final album, which was meant to be the 9th one, wasn't it, at some point?
Yeah, but they're like the 1975, they're just lying.
Yeah.
They're lying. They just keep saying, look, you know, there's going to be an end to this. And we're like, okay.
I think a lot of bands want to do like a very symbolic trilogy where each album is very different but all coherent together, and that quickly goes out the window.
There's a notion that something is special because it's limited, especially in a creative aspect. Think Music Sounds Better With You by Stardust. Like that is a special song for a lot of people because it is the only one by Stardust.
But what would those people say if Thomas Bangalter just unearthed like a full EP of Music Sounds Better With You from the Stardust era between the two of them? Because I can't remember who else is in Stardust.
I can't remember. I know it's some of Daft Punk and some of the guys, but you know what I mean? That is a one where people look at it. You know, I think that's why the 1975 had famously said, I think it was on a Radio 1 interview, that they had 3 albums and that was going to, you know, it was going to be 3 albums and then dead. No more 1975. And what? They're on album 5, going back to the studio. And I think, you know, it sounds, I suppose there's a naivety to that, because if you are the sort of band where you don't release your album till you're actually signed, for example, and you have a momentum about you, then you will think, right, you know, by the time we've done 3 albums, we probably won't have anything left to say. Because if the bands you aspire to be like are bands like the Sex Pistols that have 1 album.
Yeah, that's like the one and done sort of thing, isn't it?
That's going to be your projection of what you think you need to do. And you're going to think, well, my favourite band has a solid trilogy of albums, and that's all we're going to do if we ever make it. And I think some of the bands make it, and then they go, well, you know, not only is the money pretty good maybe, or whatever it is, you know, but I think a lot of them, they go, well, if I stop doing this, what am I going to do next? And I don't think a lot of them have an exit strategy. I mean, this is why you see bands like Journey still touring. I mean, what is the exit strategy to being a famous musician?
I think Jack Antonoff, right, going back to Bleachers, is one of very few musicians that could get away with an exit strategy, because he's producing for so many famous people, like, say, Taylor Swift and the 1975 and so many more, that he is set for life. The accolades, not monetarily, but he can work with anybody in the world, because how many people will want to work with him? If he is produced and wrote songs with Taylor Swift, that is a gateway to millions of other artists. Do you know what I mean?
100%, yeah.
And they'll say, I want to work with you because you produced my favourite Taylor Swift song. And that is unlimited business for Jack Antonoff.
Yeah,
now,
you would think so. You would hope to think so.
Yeah, because that is like what a lot of people, it's almost like, if you think of it like sports sort of personalities, the only exit strategy, if they have to retire young, is to coach.
Yes.
So
Yeah. Or to commentate. Or one of the various avenues.
So
yes.
you have like if you wanted to do your trilogy of albums on a major label and retire, presumably at like 33, in most cases, you would have the options of TV presenter, producer, or songwriter, really.
Yeah.
Or live in your mansion on Beverly Hills with a dwindling income.
Or reality TV. Or there is many avenues. There is really many avenues. But I think, though, it's not necessarily the idea of stopping. There's one thing wanting to stop. But I think my point is that a lot of the artists, they get to this point where they're like, well, this is us. We've expired. And they're like, we don't want to stop there. So I think that's the interesting thing, because a lot of these avenues, aren't necessarily creatively fulfilling for certain artists. I mean, when we're listening to Bleachers as we're talking, and the damn production is insane. I mean, there's stuff swirling around right. Headphones, going off hard panned, and like just noises and clangs and stuff, and it's almost like making me stop talking mid-sentence, because there's so much sort of, you have your standard bread and butter production, which every single Instagram producer tells you to do, your high pass and blahs, tune everything, time everything. But the Bleachers album, the reason why I think Bleachers' new album is special, and I suppose it's their entire catalogue in Jack Antonoff as a producer that really holds this, is that he said in a lot of interviews that it's about capturing a moment, in a room. And so when you're listening, it's hard to predict what's actually going to happen. You can't just lock into like a 4 to the floor beat and say, okay, I think I know where this song's going. It's like there's things that are just, I don't want to say like deliberately out of time, but I mean, on Ordinary Heaven, there's like this arpeggio part, the synth arpeggio, and I don't know what time frame and time feel it's going for.
It's more just creating a mood that they're playing to, isn't it? But they're not really sticking to it,
Yeah.
As like, they're not using it as a metronome.
Yeah, they're not using it as like a crux.
It's just going, and it's creating like an atmosphere. I mean, there's many points of this Bleachers album that makes me think of where music was going in the late 80s and early 90s. And, we talk about how we never got to see some of those genres evolve because grunge sort of just like cut it
the nose off, essentially.
And said, no more like experimentation with this type of sound design. But with like what the 1975's been doing and what Jack Antonoff's been doing with Bleachers, you're almost hearing like a resurgence of this like very Peter Gabriel-esque, I don't want to say wild music because it depends on how they do the percussion mainly.
But what you're saying is like it's got a more honest approach than where the music of the early 90s, late 80s had got to. It's still got that honesty about it that grunge had and that a lot of the 90s genres has. But it's got this overindulgent sort of composition and exploration of sort of sound design more than anything.
Yeah, because what I think of when I think of that sort of era, and the reason I bring up Peter Gabriel, right, is because it's about the way that they create like a cinematic scene. It's about the pads, the thing. It's often like a gospel chant, like for this track that we're listening to. If you pull it up for me, Peter, so
it's Ordinary.
This is Ordinary Heaven. It's got like that sort of very jazzy, all the session musicians are just going off on one in the background, and like Bleachers as a band, as a unit, they have some very talented musicians and the saxophone players and stuff. They play together, they all play different instruments, you don't know who's playing what half the time, and it creates like this sort of very like Prince-esque in places, Peter Gabriel in places. That's the sort of time frame it brings me to, if you know what I mean. Those bands, but live.
Yes, not the studio,
not the studio recordings,
but of it.
But how, say, Peter Gabriel sounds in Live at Athens, and say Prince when he's doing Sign of the Times live. It's that type of environment that seems to be really only seemed to exist, really, this mood and palette specifically in live shows at that time.
But again, I think like from a music composition standpoint, I mean, that's one of the easiest ways to stand out because, you know, Bleachers, as you just said, have a fantastic, like, 6-piece or something live band, and they're all great players, and they can all play a lot of instruments a lot of people can't. I mean, saxophone is one of those instruments that if you have a saxophone player you can just ask to play a part that you don't need to go find and hire. That is a massive, like, barrier of entry to a lot of people who want to use saxophones. You know, they just can't access them. Do you know what I mean? They can't access a talented player a lot of the time.
Good saxophone players are few and far between for a lot of people to find.
Yeah, particularly on like a local level. You know, if you're saying like we're a DIY garage band, and you know, it'd be really cool if we had like a saxophone moment here on our album. And it's like, well, you have to go on Fiverr or you have to start hunting people down on Instagram. Do you know what I mean? And that's not the same as just saying, "Oi, Steve, can you do us a saxophone part?" Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. And like, you do feel like with the way these albums sound, or like where the songs on this album sound, that they're just almost trying to make, like, I don't want to say they're making a live album because this album's very well produced and they do a lot of things that they haven't previously done. Like when we've listened to Bleachers' early stuff, I don't want to say it lacked the personality that they had live,
but it didn't capture your imagination.
If you hear it's, I would say it's like one of those things where if you heard the band live on Spotify or on TV, you go to listen to the debut album and it's not what you're expecting it to sound like. It's one of those things. Because the band have a personality live. Like when we was listening to that live album on Spotify, there's a full thing that comes with some of the bands. The way they structure the songs, the way they change things around, and the way the band play off each other live.
I think also though there's just that energy. Like some artists have an energy that they can tap into live. That it's not so much that they can't tap into it in the studio, but you know they're using the studio as a different instrument to what a live show is. And you know it's hard to sort of say. You'd think everybody would try and capture that live energy in the studio, but sometimes, you know, you can use them for the two different sort of arenas that they are.
I think not Bleachers specifically, but in general, there's been like a trend where the studio production is becoming more and more sterile and less like performative. A lot of studio sessions are just, this is a beat that we've made on a computer and now we're going to sing on it and that's it.
But what I find interesting, because Kings of Leon's released a new song as well.
Called
Mustang, which is not, it's not the same at all really as Bleachers, but what it does bring us back to is a performance. Like that song is performed, and to the untrained ear, it could have been captured live, that new song by Kings of Leon. And there's a charm to that. And again, in the world of music production where we are at, it's saying, look, you can make the best beat in the world on your computer, but do you have chemistry in the room? And that seems to be at the moment where the bigger artists are sort of trying to make their statement, because having a band play in a room is very, very difficult to facilitate. I mean, in a project studio or even a local studio environment, to capture that with any sort of success, it isn't so much impossible, but it complicates things a lot. And then to have it mixed like in a sort of commercial manner, again, complicates things a lot.
The other thing is, it's not like the idea of recording 5 people playing at once. It's the idea of actually capturing that level of performance in the room in one go, because if you capture the drum track and then everybody overdubs it, it's not really that different to just recording a drum track and then overdubbing. You know, you can get a drummer in the room and just say, go through the song and then track everything on top, but that's not really the same as having everybody get every part in. And the hardest thing to do that with, and even like I would doubt in many places, unless I actually asked Jack Antonoff which vocals were sang on what songs in the room performatively, because we're just speculating here as well. They've done a very good job of making it sound live.
But that is, I think, the most important thing, because that is the thing that is the hardest to do. especially if you are in like a very sterile, multi-track, a lot of these instruments are sequenced environment that a lot of people are in, big and small, that is like, that's the standard, that's your baseline for music production is we're going to write the song in the box, we're going to make it all absolutely perfect. And I feel like we're actually starting to see a mainstream trend away from that. I don't want to say it's the equivalent to grunge and hair metal, but if that's where we're going, it's going to be very interesting to see how people can adapt because, again, it's not so much that this is impossible to do in the box. I mean, you can make things sound sloppy, you can play instruments live and all that. And sloppy maybe isn't the right word, but it's about getting off the grid and about, the energy, and the chemistry in the room.
The other thing that you've got to think about as well is there is like, I've seen these Firestorm Instagram posts with people who think they know how to mix in every sense of the word. And you will have people who just can't mix songs without gridding it and without tightening it up. You have people who are insistent that, oh, well, I've got to make every single drum in time with the grid, every single one. And that's insane to me because why bother miking the drummer up at all?
Exactly, yeah.
Why bother recording him?
And also, it's one thing to make things theoretically perfect, but, again, music, and this is a really old and cliche quote, but music isn't perfect. It's not designed to be perfect. There's a reason why people like a shuffle and a swing in music. Yeah. There's a reason why people like the chorus effect. If things are all absolutely perfect, not only does everything start to sound the same, because instead of having people trying to play standardized music notes being like the concert pitch, but that, there's one thing trying and there's the other thing being locked into only having concert pitch.
Yeah.
And, a lot of music, and I think we said this like recently, like Led Zeppelin, is not perfect. It's not recorded at concert pitch. It's not recorded to a specific tempo. And if it is, it may, slow and speed up here and there. And the pitch can sort of detune as the song's going on. Because if everybody's instruments are detuning because they're abusing them during the course of, the song, then,
particularly if it's a 7-minute song like some of the Led Zeppelin
Robert Plant, he's going to start singing flatter and flatter because he's not singing flat. He is matching the guitar of Jimmy Page. Do you know what I mean? And that's part of the magic, and there's a lot of software that, tries to encapsulate this magic with, like either detuning or there's some very interesting things I've seen on some of the pianos and e-pianos where they have like a scale thing that basically makes all the higher pitch keys flat and all the lower pitch keys sharp to sort of, give you this sort of magic of things not actually being concert pitch. But I also think like, the way that people are sort of trying to make music, it's not very exciting walking in to like a session where you go, right, all your parts are sort of planned out. Can you play exactly that? And if you can't, we're either going to make it sound like you did play that, or, we're just not going to use you for the song.
I've been astounded in so many music documentaries about how many bands, like you'll get punk bands, they'll go into the studio to record and it'll just be a Roland electric drum kit and they'll say to the drummer, play your part on that. And you're like, well, for all we know, they're taking the MIDI out and then hitting Q.
Yeah, just quantizing
the full thing. And, like we say, I understand it from like I'm the engineer, I want to know what the drummer's going to play and then decide what I want to do with it. But it's just very, very strange, like to think like if you was in one of these bands, how much that would suck if you was the drummer walking into these major label studios going, right, well, I'm not recording drums today. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And you're practically practicing the song out in one go. I mean, like you say, we've had like big drummers go on record, like with Daft Punk saying, thank you for letting me play the full song, because this is like a big thing. And this is more down to the producers than it is the band, how they want to go around doing it.
And it isn't a new thing either. Like I always remember being shocked by, you have these songs like Breakthrough by Queen and a lot of the 80s ZZ Top albums where, you see something, you read something and you go, oh, this is the version, like with the Queen on the Miracle expanded version that recently came out. It's like, this is the version with real drums and bass. And you go, oh, so yeah, nobody played the drums and bass on Breakthrough. And
Which
you
is
just
like a shock, isn't it? When you're looking at Queen going, well, they clearly can do it, but that was a creative choice.
But again, you know, if you grow up, like that's a song that I grew up watching the music video for, and they're all playing the parts, and you know, you think, well, maybe they used some clever effects, or maybe they you know, had a MIDI pickup or something for the bass, because you know, it obviously doesn't sound real. But there's another thing for somebody, even the band, just to be like, yeah, nobody played that, you know. And I remember reading about the ZZ Top drum sound in Sound on Sound. It's like, yeah, it's all drum machines, and then we just recorded the odd crash cymbal to make it sound, you know, in fill, to make it sound organic, like a rock band, because they're, you know, they're a rock blues band. And it's like, oh, so nobody played any of that. And, you know, it doesn't so much ruin the song, but it can change your perception. Because, you know, a lot of people, I think, you know, you see people mime to songs. People mime a drummer playing, to like, even to like dance songs, you know, because in people's heads, you know, a drum part is still played. You know, that's what a lot of people perceive. And I think, you know, to not have anybody play anything on a record, it's not so much unsatisfying, but it's, you know, it sort of creates a barrier between the listener and the song in a weird way, you know. And I like a lot of sequenced music, and I like listening to electronic music where, you know, when you listen to it, that somebody's made the full track in Ableton. It's not that it's bad, but, you know, if every single song you ever hear is that, then you're going to start wanting to hear something really off the wall, like Bleachers or what Kings of Leon's doing and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people don't like produced music full stop, do they? A lot of people like the rough around the edges bands, and this is partly the reason why, is because you would like to believe they're playing every instrument, but that's the funny part, is that even rough around the edges recordings aren't necessarily being played by even like you know, bands who are local to like a very small scene. They can still be going, oh, well, I want to, you know, it's like you say, I think everybody is guilty of going, yeah, do you want to just touch up that drum fill, or do you want to just tune the singer?
Pitch correction is always what you hear, even like you say, even on the most local level, people will be like, can you just fix that note? And there's nothing wrong with that. But is, you know, there's like an honesty to it. And I think when I find it really, really refreshing if I hear like a song by the Killers where they've deliberately not corrected Brandon Flowers' vocals. You know, it's like a breath of fresh air. And, you know, it's not to say Brandon Flowers is even singing out of tune, but sometimes there's like the way that the notes can beat and the excitement that you hear, where you just can tell that it hasn't been, you know, overcorrected and it hasn't been just flattened to death. And I think, again, that's what I've really enjoyed on this Bleachers album. And there is some auto-tune on the Bleachers album, but again, like a lot of the rock bands, there's like well, it's on or it's off. There's not a in between.
Yeah, it's not pitch correction. It's also tune, like doing its thing whilst Jack Antonoff's singing. So
yeah,
it's hard to explain that to people who don't understand the difference between pitch correction and auto-tune and what that means for, say, the singer and how that's sung and the effect versus the practicality. You're like, auto-tune is like a stomp pedal for the singer, whereas pitch correction is like moving the drummer on the grid after they've played it, you know, to make it sound however you want it to sound. It's not like, it's not an effect.
It's crazy now, but I know I've been saying honesty a lot, but there is like a honesty and a sincerity to auto-tune, because everybody knows what it is. And it's like a lot of people have said, you know, you can't use auto-tune without singing. You know, it's not something you can do after the fact. And I know you can sort of say the same thing for pitch correction, but with pitch correction, you can hit any note and say, well, this one, we'll put this a fifth up, and this one we'll put a third up, and this one we'll bring
tweak
down
the formant to make it sound as natural as possible.
Yeah, and I know it doesn't sound fantastic if you go crazy and start pitching stuff up an octave, but the point being is you have to be, with auto-tune, you have to hit the note for auto-tune to pick up the note.
Yeah, you have to be somewhat close.
Yeah, and if you wobble and have a really, really wide vibrato, you will hear that on the auto-tune, you know. Whereas in pitch correction software, you just smack it down so it's straight. And you know, it's one of those things where, you know, I think there's still like autotunes become a very different sort of process and a device to what it used to be. You know, it was the original they're cheating, you know, in the studio, and it's sort of become the opposite. It's sort of become like a, you know, retroactively a skill-based art form using, you know, singing into autotune and tracking that autotune down as it happens.
The other thing that I find really refreshing at the moment about like I won't say saxophone revival, because there's like there's a lot of saxophone players in lots of different styles of music, but what is very nice with saxophones in general is that they're very difficult to emulate on software, and very few companies have got a robust way to emulate a saxophone player in MIDI. You can get stuff that kind of sounds like a cheap like one-tone saxophone, which maybe some people wouldn't notice, but to get the nuance of everything you can do, it's a bit like emulating a guitar. You can have a sample of a power chord and pitch it up and down, but you can emulate somebody doing something with any complexity on guitar.
It's the way that it's so expressive and emotive, you know. It's the same as vocals, you know. You can have somebody theoretically sing a song, but that, you know, like with software or whatever, or even, God forbid, AI, like we've been hearing people, you know, mutter about. But it sounds boring because there's no way for it to, you know, it can't dig in at any point. And a lot of the time, if you're using a artificial voice, it's not going to sing flat and sharp. And these are things, you know, there's a reason why people like guitar bends.
Yes.
Guitar bends are, you know, a sort of musical pitch nightmare. You know, a lot of people struggle to get to the note they're bending to, or the bend past it and all that, but that is where a lot of the magic is. You know, it's the idea of getting, you know, slightly sharp to add excitement, or, you know, slightly flat. I don't know, flat's normally a lot less satisfying, but you know what I mean.
And that's like one of the things that makes the Bleachers album so good. But like me and Peter's been really, really enjoying, because it's only come out like yesterday or so, as of recording,
on Friday.
Call Me After Midnight is
I love
just
that song,
such a fun song, and it kind of shares. Obviously, it sort of almost sounds a bit like Being Funny in a Foreign Language by the 1975, but that will partly be due to the fact that there's a similar ensemble of instrumentation. And the approach to keyboards will be similar, but also with Jack Antonoff producing the 1975's album, it will sound similar because they've gone for like a similar thing.
It would be a very different song and mood though if the 1975 did it, because if the 1975 had done Call Me After Midnight, that hook that is really pronounced in that chorus, it would be like an If You're Too Shy, or, well, a Slur If You're Too Shy situation. Like, they would have gone right into the yacht rock of it. And it would have been a lot, you know, a lot more...
bombastic.
Yeah, bombastic and a lot more refined, whereas on the Bleachers one, it's almost like they've recorded the song to be like, oh yeah, this guy's just sat down at the piano and everybody just started playing along with him. That's how it feels.
You almost feel like if they made a music video, it would be one person playing piano and slowly everybody's walking into the room, picking up their instruments, dusting them off, and slowly starting to vamp on the keyboard part. That's what the song's sort of saying to you, you know, like in the way it's constructed.
Or people are sat there, they're listening first. Like, it feels like everybody on that song is listening to what's happening to make a decision on what they're going to play, even as the song's already started. And that's the sort of magic that I think that Bleachers have actually achieved on their album. And I feel like that is something that a lot of people don't even know of. Do you know what I mean? A lot of people, there'll be a lot of really young people listening to this, you know, who don't really understand what Bleachers are referencing to.
I was thinking that in a way it kind of reminded me of the Strands album in a few places.
Oh yeah. That's a very deep cut that probably nobody will know, but that's fine.
No, but I just thought it because of the way the songs are, it sort of has like what 70s rock bands would call an R&B feel. If you know what I mean. And particularly with the way the keyboards are and the way it's like a lot of gang vocals and harmonies and stuff. It kind of just reminded me of the Strand.
Yeah, it has a very sort of 70s It's weird because it's got like a 70s feel, an 80s mindset, but then obviously the production, you know, a lot of the stuff you hear in some of these albums where they're referenced to these older genres and these older feels, they don't have the same production. And it's a bit like the Night Games album. It's not the songs and the instruments, it's the swells and the effects and like these crescendos that happen. That's the sort of stuff that never happened in these songs, you know, like hard cuts where they've built like a massive reverb swell but just slice it off and stuff like that.
Yeah,
that's what makes it so refreshing, because it is not a stale imitation of what these bands did in the 70s and 80s. It's this new take on it with a different focus where they're just trying to capture an immersion. And I think having more immersion in music, a bit like what a lot of people keep talking about, is definitely a good thing.
Yeah, and we've sort of done, once again, a little bit of like a comparative sort of thing on honesty within music, right? Because it's tough with honesty, because you can do electronic music honestly as well, but it's just like it's refreshing. And I think me and Peter do gravitate towards some of these releases when you're listening to music when you've heard a lot of music as well. These releases are exciting because you feel like you haven't heard anything anywhere near.
They're
like
very
them.
Uncommon as well.
Yeah, and there's only, like you said, there's a handful of albums that come out with this type of sort of feel and arrangement. But that's been our thoughts on Bleachers and what Bleachers evoke when you listen to music. They are fantastic. So, like I say, we say Call Me After Midnight, Tiny Moves, Modern Girl. I know two of them are the singles, but they are really good songs.
Yeah, Call Me After Midnight, we could have a music video.
Yeah. So thanks for listening, everybody, and tune in next week.